Hello and welcome to the Ubele International Conversation. We're going to be kicking off in about 3 minutes. We're just waiting for other people to join the conversation who are entering the room. So give us about 3 minutes time and we'll be ready to start.
Thank you.
Hello, I hope I'm broadcasting. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ubele Emergency International Conversation Connecting the Diaspora. Today, we're going to be hearing from people across the diaspora in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in Nigeria, in Tobago, in Trinidad, and in Jamaica, to name just a few of the places that we're going to be touching base with today. This conversation came about as a result of a conversation with Dr. Yancy Rolson. Yancy, are
Hello,
you there?
Michael.
Hello. Should we just ask Jenny to take away the slides so that we can be right in the middle of this conversation? And so, Yancy, why an international conversation connecting the diaspora?
Well, I mean, over the past couple of months, since the COVID situation, we've been seeing in the media, particularly over here, that they weren't addressing our needs. We know what the media is like at the best of time, you know, they all have their agendas and they tell us what they want to tell us. They don't tell us what we actually need to know. Mm-hmm. And I suppose going through some of there's a subscription I go to, it's an African subscription, and they were talking about the tonic in Madagascar, the $1 test in Senegal, and the track and trace in Ghana. And I was thinking to myself, how come we're not hearing about those things, you know? All we were hearing was flatten the curve, but nothing mm-hmm. about what other people are doing across the globe. And then we realized that actually Black and minority ethnic people were dying disproportionately here in the UK, but mm-hmm. you know, our Caribbean and our African counterparts, it wasn't happening. So it wasn't necessarily mm-hmm. something to do with our bodies. What was it? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what sparked me thinking we need to speak to the diaspora and find out what's happening internationally.
Mm-hmm. Because there is a kind of view over here, isn't there, that there is some biology that is what is making the difference. And yeah. The fact that it hasn't, you know, at one time I remember being very scared for what coronavirus would mean to the Caribbean, for what coronavirus would mean to Africa. And then particularly when we started getting reports of the disproportionality, I was thinking, hang on, this thing could be wiping our people out all over the place. And clearly it's not been, which means that it may not be about biology. It might be about something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at one point they were telling us the vitamin D. That was what we were mm-hmm. hearing constantly. But yeah, as you say, I mean, I have my family that live in Trinidad, and when I was reading the WHO reports, because that was where I was going for my information, it was showing that Trinidad was top of the list in the way they were dealing with it. So, you know, it was the lack of actual accurate information we were getting here, and the whole flawed public health approach that was saying, you know, it's happening to BAME people, but they're not addressing why it was happening to BAME people. Their emphasis was just on flatten the curve.
I mean, I'm going to talk to, we have some experts, we have a whole line of experts tonight. And one of the things I'm really interested in talking to the experts about is that I remember during the HIV, I was working actually in sexual health for one of the primary care trusts. And one of the things that we learned about HIV was how as a virus, it piggybacks on other things that are going on your body. It piggybacks on other viruses, and viruses like to piggyback. And, you know, and it occurred to me today that the virus, the coronavirus, is piggybacking on the virus of racism.
Absolutely.
In the UK, yeah, in the United States. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Across Europe, actually.
Across Europe.
Across Europe. Yeah. And you know, we've seen how it's erupted, but it's been bubbling. It's been bubbling a long time. And coronavirus isn't the only thing that's been piggybacking, you know. We're facing all the health inequalities, You know, they started talking about the fact that it was diabetes, BAME people, heart disease, BAME people, but we know it's more than that. We know the links to poverty, but the health inequalities, and also the kind of focus on, we know that BAME staff are the ones that are out there in the front line, and we won't have those conversations. They won't the conversations the media was pushing. So we have to find out for ourselves, you know, where does the root of it come from? We have to uncover the things that they don't want us to see and hear. And I think the best way for us to do that is to speak to the people across the globe that belong to the diaspora, so we can come up with our own evidence-based solutions. Because we want solutions that mean something to us.
Well, thanks for explaining. Thanks for coming on. And thank you for making it happen. Thank you, Dr. Yancy Ralston. Why don't we go to our first panel? And our first panel are Anne, Renee, Hayden, and Anita. And they're going to tell us a little bit more about what they do as we go to them. So why don't you switch your cameras on, panel number 1, and we'll go straight into the first panel. And the first person up is Renee. Hello, Renee.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. So, Renee, you're in the United States?
Well, yes, the United States is where I do my primary business, certainly.
Right.
But I was born in Trinidad and Tobago.
You were born in Trinidad. I think we've got a lot of Trinidad and Tobagonians on tonight. Yeah.
Well, that's a good thing, isn't it?
You seem to be expanding all over the world, making things happen all over the world. So,
yes,
so tell me, Renee, what is it that you are doing in the United States? And how is it connected to COVID?
Sure, I'll certainly tell you that. I'm a criminologist and a criminal psychologist. I also work in artificial intelligence as an ethicist and a strategist. My work looks at the double pandemic of COVID-19 and racism. So much of the work that I do in artificial intelligence as an ethicist is I look at questions of race, bias, and discrimination with algorithms and how these things impact communities of color. So my work, again, in criminology also looks at bias and discrimination and race. And much of what is being designed in artificial intelligence when it comes to surveillance technology, facial recognition, how does that impact communities of color? Things like predictive analytics and predictive policing, crime forecasting, DNA forecasting, all of these are being used by law enforcement. But what is happening with COVID-19, many of the law enforcement and national security strategies that are being used are now being used to track, to monitor, and to isolate individuals with COVID-19.
I've lost your sound.
Looking at, of course, looking at racism. So what are we seeing? We're seeing institutional racism, structural discrimination, a lot of inequalities, many of these things linked to people of color. So in the United States, it would be Latinos, Afro-Caribbean, African-American, and of course, Native American. In the UK, we're seeing Bangladesh, Pakistani, and of course, Black individuals are dealing with the very similar issues. So we know it's not biological, we know it's not genetic, we know it's structural, we know it's societal, we know it's because of housing and unemployment and the jobs that people have that are exposing them to the virus. We know it's about neighborhood density and it's about lower incomes. But what we are looking at with this pandemic is that much of what is happening in artificial intelligence is also focused on vulnerable communities. And once you have that merger between law enforcement, national security, public health, then you're creating a context for something very, very dubious to happen. So my response as an ethicist is to ensure that data, Black and brown data, is diverse and makes up the data sets that many of these systems are being tested on, and to ensure everything that we do when it comes to artificial intelligence has diversity, equity, and inclusion baked into the life cycle of these processes. And really what I do as an AI ethicist is about raising consciousness. It's about being vigilant and ensuring that we don't use technology to create a digital chokehold, like the chokehold or the knee, a digital knee on the necks of individuals of color.
Because there's a belief, isn't there, when we think about artificial intelligence, there is a belief, isn't there, that because it's artificial intelligence, it is able to function without bias.
Right,
Yeah?
and that is the belief.
But what people forget, I think, is what you're saying, is that the artificial intelligence is actually created. If it's created by somebody with bias, it will have the same biases as the people that create it.
Well, definitely. And what we're saying is much of the data is historic. And if you're using historic data, it means it's been pretty much dirty data that would really need to be scrubbed. But could we scrub racism and discrimination and bias out of data that has been collected historically, particularly in the US, in a context where we see there is a lot of discrimination? So again, I think for a lot of people, they believe because it's science, it's naturally objective and neutral, but it isn't, because what we are seeing is many of those old biases and stereotypes and implicit or unconscious bias really slipping through the back door of what we call design optimization. So while the issues that we are seeing may not be intentional, not that data scientists are racist, they're probably not. What we're saying is that there needs to be some measure of education and learning and consciousness and an understanding that the data that is being used really needs to be dissected and distilled. So that's where we are.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Listen, we're going to come back to you, Renee, but
Sure.
in the meantime, we're just going to learn something about Anne. Hello, Anne.
Oh, hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm not muted. Am I? Can you hear me?
No, I can hear you. I can hear you
great.
loud and clear. And tell me where you are.
I'm in London. I work for I work for an organisation called Future Men. We're London-wide organisation, and I manage a team, the boys development team. So we go into schools to support boys in lots of different areas. Sometimes around behaviour management, quite often around the transition from year 6 to year 7 in secondary school. And we support them also around school exclusions, really to kind of to sort of really support them in around their education, because all the work that we do is based in schools, and some of it
so young people must be having a particularly difficult time at the moment.
They are having a particularly difficult time at the moment, and I was supposed to be joined by a young person, which I would have really liked for everybody to hear what he had to say, but unfortunately he couldn't make it. I think those who are the year 11s and the year 6s, so that would be those who are going from primary to secondary school, and those who are leaving secondary to start college. They are the ones really that we are seeing the most difficulty with, because we support children from year 6 in primary school all the way up until year 11 in secondary school, which is the final year. And so the year 6s have not had their SATs exams. They didn't do those because the school closures happened before all of that was to take place. And the same with the year 11s. They haven't sat their GCSEs. So there's kind of it's been challenging for them, because they haven't had the closure. You know, normally when you're finishing secondary school, you have all those things where you do all your prom, you do all those things that come in at the end. You have you put all that work in for your GCSEs or your SATs. You get your best grade. They're having to have teacher assessments, because they you know, the grades, you know, the mock exams that they thought were just, you know, getting them ready, have turned out to be the real thing for them, for our year 6, for our year 11s. And, you know, we're also seeing not only that, but those children in between, some of whom have need additional support with their education. So they may have special educational needs or need additional support in the classroom. They are now finding themselves, the parents of those children are now finding themselves having to teach their children at a level that perhaps they're not accustomed to working with, and also children who would normally have support in the classroom are not getting any of that at home. We're also seeing that some of them don't have access to the resources that would allow them to access their homework online, so they can't do it. They don't have computers. Sometimes they don't have broadband. All of those things that we all take for granted. They don't all have access to those things.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of heard something that I thought was, I'd not even thought about it, but a lot of young people do have laptops at home, but they don't have Word on their laptops, you know, because they use their laptops as gaming machines and not as work machines. And so lots of young people who seemingly had the tools didn't have the tools to do things that you and I might take for granted.
I mean, I think that's I mean, I don't doubt that. What was coming up for us was that there were students who didn't actually have laptops and didn't have broadband at home. They didn't have broadband in their homes. So they were having to borrow laptops from the school to get their work done, because everything, as you know now, is online. And when, you know, with school closure, everything's done online.
Yes. Okay. Dr. Hayden Noel. How are you doing, sir?
Hello. Nice to be here, Mike. Nice to be here and be part of this discussion. Well, briefly, I'm a clinical associate professor at the University of Illinois, but I'm also the director of our MBA program and academic director of our online MBA program and MBA program. So I actually want to piggyback on some of what Anne said. My area is education, but I also, my PhD was in cognitive psychology and marketing strategy. One of the things we've seen here in the US, it's critical, is that students, especially poor students, don't have access to what I like to call the tools and the technology that's needed to be successful given the advent of COVID. Traditionally, without this pandemic, these students are faced with this challenge, okay, where up to 44% and sometimes it's estimated that 45% of both Black and Hispanic students don't have access to either a dedicated computer. There might be one computer in the household, as Anne said, but it's not for everyone there. And broadband. So if you have one and not the other, then you cannot work effectively. And this is exacerbated. This is called the digital divide, and it's exacerbated by COVID. So now this impacts us much more so than people who are not minorities. We have also found, research has found in the US that traditionally when students come back from what's called the summer slide, up to 30% of them have lower reading gains and 50% lower math gains from the previous year. 30%, so their reading slips and their math, even worse. But we expect this to be exacerbated, worsened by the fact that they had a drop off before summer came. So if there is a second wave, the lack of tools and the lack of technology is going to make our learning outcomes for students of color in the US and I would say internationally even worse. I am presenting to a group of academics in Ghana next week, and we are talking about this very thing. And one of the things I discovered in talking to them beforehand, doing my research, was that between 50, in some schools, there are some schools that are well off, and they're partnered with companies to provide data, etc. But in some schools, up to 50 and 60% of students, 60% don't have access to data to engage in classes. They have to use WhatsApp, and even so, they don't have all of the cell phone data. So they don't have data to view live sessions on the computer. They don't even have enough data to participate using just regular phone apps. So this pandemic is a pandemic that we are really being impacted with terribly with regard to education.
And so we think, don't we? We think about the number of deaths. We think about the number of illnesses, but we actually when we start beginning to really add it up, that there's a whole pile of other things which are impacting on us that we haven't started even thinking about.
Exactly. I like to think of it as I think of it as someone carrying a brick or two on their back, right? There's this professor at Harvard. He's from St. Lucia. David Williams is his name, and he talks about the daily indignities that you face. There's a scale he uses to measure it, and talks about the negative impact of poor service, being called names, being kicked out of its establishment. All of these things add psychological pressure and stress to our daily lives, leads to higher premature birth, higher death rates for infants when they're born, higher heart disease, etc., etc. But you add on that the additional stress of poor learning outcomes because of COVID. Imagine the stress faced by parents, faced by students, faced by educators. But parents and
I'd like to ask Renee. There's a question. It seems there's a question that's coming to my head. Renee, is there an algorithm for racism?
Well, of course, there's not an algorithm for racism. How do you define racism in an engineering or mathematical term? It's like defining fairness, right? It's really impossible to do. What we find the data scientists are trying to do what they're trying to do would be create algorithms to interrogate algorithms. So if they're dealing with questions of bias and discrimination, they're trying to create algorithms now that can check and mitigate against bias and discrimination. But it's really, really a difficult process. So what we're saying is that we've got to have an ethical approach to AI, one that looks at really robust and rigorous interrogation of these systems. And of course, looking at things that responsible AI, accountability, transparency, explainability. These things are really critical. But I think what a lot of people are not paying attention to is the fact that because of COVID-19, because it's a life and death issue, because people want treatment, because people want to ensure that we navigate and negotiate ourselves out of this pandemic, people are giving up their data. So it's a question of privacy as well. And you're giving up your data for the benefit of healthcare and for the benefit of the public good, but you're not understanding what's being done with your data. Who's collecting it? How long are they keeping it? How are they going to dispose it? Do you have the right to be forgotten? And if you give your data in a situation where you want to be, responsible, and you want to ensure that if you have COVID-19, there's a way to track you and to monitor you and to isolate you, when that data ends up in the hands of law enforcement and national security, could your data be used against you? Could it be used to criminalize you? And what we're seeing with data that a lot of people are not paying attention to is that artificial intelligence is seen as the solution. It's called tech solutionism to many of the challenges that we're seeing now, particularly a pandemic, because it's very pervasive, it's very powerful, and it can track and monitor a pandemic at scale. So it has the potential to really save lives. But we've got to be cautious. And this is why I say when it comes to data, we've got to be vigilant, because we've got to understand that this same data could be used to over-police vulnerable communities, to further marginalize vulnerable communities, and to further victimize vulnerable communities. So much of the work that I do is looking at how we can use data through my company, Urban AI, looking at how we could use data to empower urban communities, where you find the most amount of density, where you're going to find high percentages of COVID-19, and how do we empower, and how do we ensure that these systems that are being used, like facial recognition or facial analysis, all of these things have been really questionable. And what we are seeing is much of what is being designed from a public safety, public health, public security perspective really is to surveil Black and brown communities, which are also the communities where we're seeing the virus, which are also the communities that are, experiencing that double pandemic. Violence is a public health issue, police violence is a public health issue, racism is a public health issue, COVID is a public health issue. So it's like, how much is one community going to experience? But on the other hand, if we don't educate people about the power of their data, they're going to find themselves outside or at the end of this pandemic tunnel with things that they weren't expecting. So while we may be dealing with what's going on the streets of the world, there's something else that's happening in a virtual space that you are not prepared for. So this is why, as an AI ethicist, my work is really about ensuring that diversity, equity, and inclusion is on the agenda at every stage of the life cycle when it comes to designing, developing, and deploying any kind of emerging technology.
Wow. It's a bit scary, isn't it, Renee?
Well, it's not about being scared, right? It's about being educated and being conscious and being vigilant, and that's what it is. And I think communities of color are great consumers of technology. Look at our numbers on Facebook. Look at Black Twitter, right? Look at how we use technology. But are we really educated consumers of technology? And when it comes to vigilance, it's about rights. And what we're seeing with much of the technology that's being designed to surveil, either from a public health or public security perspective, is that it may not be paying significant attention to due process and duty of care. So my work as an ethicist is to ensure due diligence is a part of the process, and to ensure that we are always on top of what is happening in that realm. Because what we have seen so far, many of the big challenges when it comes to AI, the risk assessment tools that are being used for sentencing Black and brown people that have been overestimating whether or not someone is going to reoffend. And we're seeing when it comes to healthcare data, much of the data is not as diverse as it should be. So you're seeing things that are being designed to look at skin cancer or to look at breast cancer that are really misdiagnosing Black and brown people. So we have got to really advocate for Black and brown data to matter when it comes to what is being designed, because pre-COVID-19, as we move out of this space, you would find more and more AI is being used for many solutions. Look at what we're doing right now. This is because of AI, Zoom, right? When you think of how people have been consuming Netflix, also algorithms working there. Remote work, when you look at robotics that's being used now to go into hospitals, to sanitize, to track people who are not social distancing publicly, you are going to see more and more new and emerging technologies being part of your life, but you may not have the understanding on what that technology is doing for communities of color. So once you have...
So one thing that we need to do is that we need to increase our understanding. We need to make sure that we know what we're clicking when we say yes. Yeah?
Exactly. And if you're going for healthcare,
what else do we need to be doing?
Well, you've got to be vigilant, right? You've got to be conscious. You've got to understand that data is power. And data right now is reordering the world, power structure, because you find the countries that own the data are the countries that will eventually lead in that regard. So what's happening now? The big tech companies, Microsoft, Apple, they're the ones who are designing much of the solution. Look at the response in China, in South Korea, in Thailand, in Singapore, all data-driven solutions, again, to COVID-19. So when you think about it, you've really got to be conscious. You've really got to understand. Data is also being used to design the vaccine. The country who owns the vaccine pretty much is going to rule the world, right? Post-COVID-19. So I think it's a big question. And I know for a lot of people, artificial intelligence is still new. But what I tell most people, it's not going to step out of the universe. You're already using it on your smartphone. You're already being tracked. Once you are on Facebook, you've been exposed to algorithms, because algorithms, run things in a social media space.
Okay, Dr. Noel, you talked about education. You talked about some problems in education, but I know that you all got some solutions. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. The problems, I like to talk about problems as the 3 T's, okay? Tools, technology, and therapy. So tools, do we have the computers and so on and iPads necessary? Do students have access to them? Technology, do they have access to internet? Therapy, shifting online has caused a lot of stress, and a lot of parents are not equipped to actually deal with their own children, some of them who have special needs. And COVID has exacerbated this situation as well. It just made it worse. So what can we do? There are a couple things that are being attempted here right now in the US that have been somewhat successful in the short term. So, for instance, you have in some school districts where, like in Arkansas, there's one school district where they estimated 25% of households had no internet whatsoever. So what schools did is they actually connected with local television networks, PBS, etc., and provided daily television programming for students. Those between the age of 5 and 11, it was in the morning, and then the afternoon for high school students and so on. Additionally, because they didn't want to shift entirely online because some students were not able to cope with it, and additionally they did not have the tools and technology, they created packets, so work packets for students to pick up, and they partnered with newspapers to have to use their drop boxes, and students would pick up these learning packets and take home and work on them. There are other things we can do as well. For technology, they use buses and went into neighborhoods where students might not have access and use these buses as Wi-Fi hotspots, so students can access the information, all right? But one thing I think we need to do, because these are interesting and they're short term and so on, but we have to start thinking long term. What if this happens again? Or just to help students of color, what can we do as a village and as a community? And there are a couple of things we can do. Again, 3 T's. I think we need to look at how can we create cooperatives to share our time, our treasure, and our talent. Treasure being your money. But time and your talent are the most important here. We need to establish groups where we can identify what our skill sets are and create loosely gathered, I call them tutoring hubs. So if there are 10 people of color and allies who are not of color, but this has to be driven by us. They could be on the bus with us, they'll be on the back of the bus, but we have to drive that bus. We have to drive that bus. We create these tutoring partnerships, reach out to school districts and find students who need that tutoring help, especially now in this age of COVID, where the parents might not have the skill sets necessary, nor sometimes the patience necessary. I know when I tutored my kid, I became more impatient with her than I was with a stranger's kid as an instructor. I'm sorry.
I recognize it.
We have to look at ways we, as a collective, could handle these challenges that COVID has brought to the fore. They have always existed. The inequities to access to tools and tech have always existed, but how can we do that, right? Some of us might be therapists. How can we offer our services while protecting people's privacy? How can we offer our services to parents and students? So we have to think about how we as a collective could work both online and offline to actually enhance learning outcomes and have these students come back after the summer slide and not be so far behind other students, people who are white and other students who don't have some of the same challenges.
Thanks very much. And so you're right in the middle of this. You're working
right
with young
in the middle
people.
of it.
You're talking, and Dr. Hayden Noel is talking about the young people that you're working with.
Right in the middle of this. I was writing down, taking down points as you were talking, Dr. Hayden, because Dr. Noel, because I think actually I like the idea very much of the tutoring hubs.
Yes.
Some of our young people, as you say, the disparities in resources and access to what's needed for education have always been there. It's just been exacerbated by this situation. And if we are not careful, the ramifications for this are going to be generational, because some of these children they were already not going to be in the top areas of academic outcomes. So their grades were not going to be at the very top. But now they are going to be much closer to the bottom than they would have been, because they are going to be having teacher assessments. The grade that is being used to assess their final mark was not their best effort, but that's all that they are left with. And It could have the impact of them not getting into the colleges and the further education institutions that they want to. Therefore, they don't do as well. They come out, they're less able. I mean, who knows where we're going to be when this is all, when the dust settles on this? What are the jobs, you know, the people, everybody's going to be vying for jobs. You know, are these young people going to be prepared based on the fact that their grades have been lower than they should have been? They're going to be further behind than they should have been. We need to really think about, as you say, identifying the skill sets and getting a catch-up premium, as it were, because some of these young people will need to catch up. And
Exactly.
how are we going to support them? Because parents now, as I said in the beginning, they are feeling the pressure of having to support their children at a level that is really beyond them. And, you know, they can't be expected to do this over this period of time. They never expected this to happen and go on for so long. And it was, all the schools were thrown into that situation because they locked down very quickly. And there was no real guidance for the schools as to what they should be doing and how long this was. So here we are 10 weeks later, and now we're looking at opening up, and we've got all these restrictions that are going to be placed on what can and can't be done. And those children who have fallen behind, as many of them will have been, because what we found was we surveyed the parents and the young people. We're still in the middle of doing that to find out what the impact has been, where they feel the support was best needed, whether they've had it or not, and a lot of parents are coming out and saying to us that they feel that they have not had enough support to help their children, and they don't have the skill to do it.
And it looks like, I mean, I would be very surprised if even when we went back to normal, we went back to the normal that we had before the abnormal started. And it looks like there might be quite a big shift in the way that we educate people. It might be that we're going to be staying online much more and expect people to continue to do much more online as we move forward. Do you think your students are prepared for that?
I think actually for the impact that we've seen on the more vulnerable students, I think we have to be ready when it next comes. If another lot, we don't know what's going to happen to the reinfection rate. We don't know. We might go back into lock. We don't know what's going to happen, but we should be better prepared if we have to move to a more sustained way of working online. We have to do better for our more vulnerable pupils. We have to do better. We have to learn from what's happened now and make sure that students are, if everything goes online and we're all working on Teams and you have virtual classroom, we have to make sure that all pupils have access to the information that they need. Otherwise, they won't be able to take part in the classroom. We've also found another interesting thing that we've come up with. A lot of the young people that we work with sometimes struggle a little bit in the classroom. They struggle with the rules, they struggle with their relationships sometimes that they're having with their teachers. And what we've seen in some of those pupils is they've actually flourished in the lockdown. They've actually flourished not being in school and having the freedom and being at home with their families. And their families don't report any of the behaviors that are being reported at school. Some of their families are saying, well, no, he's doing really well. They're thriving out of school. And I think for those pupils, we have to ask some questions as well. How do we support, when they go back into school, what happens? How do we maintain?
Can I ask you a question, Anne?
Yeah,
do you think, as Professor David Williams said from Harvard, that this is because of some of them, the daily indignities some of them might face outside of the home, and they've actually internalized some of that, so it makes learning more difficult if they're in a school where they might not necessarily be in the majority. So when they're at home, they don't have that stress, right? Maybe that could be part of it, where the bricks of racism, bit by bit, are being placed on your backs, and you're able to get rid of them if you're at home a little bit. I don't know. I'm just asking your opinion.
I mean, in a lot of the schools we are at, these children are not in the minority.
Okay.
They're not in the minority, but what they push against with is a lot of the authority. A lot of the schools is this.
The authority.
The authority is what they push against.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when they don't have that, they don't have interactions in those sorts of interactions. They don't. I mean, that's not all of them. You know, obviously, a lot of them they get on very well with their teachers, but sometimes there can be clashes, and some of our students they're doing quite well at home. If it wasn't for the fact that they obviously they need, and some of them actually do engage. Those that are able to can engage quite well with the learning online because there are less distractions. Sometimes the problems come.
I'd like to bring in Anita. Hello, Anita. If you take your mute off.
Hello, good evening.
Welcome. You finally managed to get here, did you? You were having.
Yes, I did. A little technical challenges here on this side of the pond today.
Okay, which side of the pond are you on? Which pond?
I'm actually in Atlanta, Georgia today.
Oh, okay.
All right. Oh, okay. And what do you do in Atlanta, Georgia?
I provide the management and leadership development and consulting to NGOs and to small and medium businesses around growth and value creation and workforce development. And also a lot of proposal development, business proposals, and also program development for NGOs around education, workforce development, business development and growth.
We had a program last week around ethnic minority businesses and COVID, and it was kind of pretty frightening the number of those businesses that will fail because of the lockdown. Is it the same in Georgia?
Oh, most definitely, and it's the same nationwide. I'm part of a group that we work to do the franchise development, and the numbers they were quoting this morning were some 50 to 75,000 Black businesses are on the brink of failure, and then in addition to that, with the some 42 million that have filed for unemployment, and there are already shifts in the marketplace with a requirement for upskilling. So it has been very devastating across the U.S. And particularly in communities of color. And I jumped in. When I came in, I heard you talking about the need for upskilling and what students were being confronted with, and the going to the online learning, and that has been a debate in the U.S. for some time, the value of it and how effective, and more now everyone is having to go to that platform. And I heard the conversation, and we see that a lot in the schools because of the psychological abuse that a lot of kids face at school. And because of their levels of emotional intelligence and soft skills, they may have decided, I don't like the teacher, even though they're very good in the subject, because they feel so disrespected. So then they don't often apply themselves. And so the virus across the US not only has impacted businesses significantly, but just the world of work, because those jobs that have been the low-skilled jobs that didn't really require technical skills, those jobs are disappearing. More of it is going to artificial intelligence. So workforce development, career development, and helping people of all ages, because people are living longer and working longer, helping them to find what their skill sets are and finding a pathway to work, and then also considering, even if you have a job, because Georgia, like many states across the U.S., are right to work states. So an employer can fire you any day with little or no cause. So that makes the vulnerable even more vulnerable. So people have really got to think about what kind of small and medium business could I create? What skills do I have that folks have to look at their livelihood and their workspace in a very different way. It was already shifted before the virus, but that really has, has occurred as a result of it. And if you've seen anything on the news between the killing of George Floyd, and also the rush to open back up cities because of the economic crisis, and now the virus is starting to really jump in numbers again. We are in a crisis in America, really, on many fronts.
Thank you really very, very much for getting here, Anita. Thanks for solving all of your challenges with the technology. I could keep going with this panel forever, because I kind of feel as if there's so much more that I want to hear. There's so much more solutions that kind of seem to be kind of tucked away in your chests. But thank you really very, very much for joining us. We're gonna go to a short break now. We're gonna go to a 5-minute break, and then we're gonna come back with panel number 2. So let me just end by saying thank you very, very much to Dr. Hayden Noel. Thank you very, very much to Anne. Thank you very, very much to Renee Cummins, and thank you very, very much to Anita. Thank you. We'll go to a break. I think we're going to be about 5 minutes. See you after the break.
Mike, that was great. Is everyone still here? I wanted to just say hello to them.
Hello.
Hi, Anita.
Hi.
Great to see you. Dr. Cummings, are you there?
Think that our conversation goes out live.
What's that?
I think that our conversation goes out live, and so I think we need to mute during the break. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, I'll try and get in touch. We can share information and get in touch later then.
Yes. Okay.
Hello and welcome back to the Ubele International Emergency Conversation on COVID-19. We've had some problems, I know, in the chat before the break, and I know that somebody's been bombing our webinar in the chat, so I apologize for that, but some messages have got through, so let's hear from Eve and from Kelsey. Eve and Kelsey, do you want to switch your cameras on? Shall we get rid of the, oh, there we are, there's Eve, and there, oh, and there's Kelsey as well. Magic is magic. Okay, what's been going on in the chat? What have people been asking? What have people been saying?
Right, it's mostly just regarding data protection and AI. So there's one question on just privacy and confidentiality being really important, especially when people are vulnerable. And also just a question around the AI ethics committee that was set up by the EU. And if we have any contacts to engage such committees and get representation on there.
Well, to make sure that there's some Black and ethnic minority people on that committee.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take that question back to Renee afterwards and see if she's got an answer that she might want to stick in the chat. Or it's something that we might be able to send out to people afterwards. So that seems like an incredibly good idea. Kelsey, what have you been seeing in the chat?
Just the same as Eva, really, and it's the same for, we're still waiting for some of you guys to tweet us. But there's one or two questions here that might, is I guess something to think about for everyone in the call about kind of children and young people, and if in this moment, are they flourishing right now with love from the family as they're in the quarantine? So, and then they're talking about young adults are usually running around working, so does that mean like they're at home with their family, spending some good time? Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. Thanks for telling us what's happening in the chat. We're going to come back to you again, perhaps after the next panel. But right now, let's get on with the next panel. And so I've got Yubo, Gregory, Evan, and Adrian, I think, if you'd like to switch your cameras on. Hello, sir. Hello, Evan Williams, I'm going to take you because your camera came on first. How are you, sir?
No problem.
How are you doing?
I'm Evan Wilson. Nice to meet everybody. I'm living in Antalya, Turkey, southern coastline.
You're in Turkey?
I've been here for 3 years.
Wow, and what are you doing in Turkey?
I'm an airline pilot for an airline here called Corendon, and we do flights into Europe, into Africa. We fly in India, and mostly charters and non-scheduled flights to tourist destinations.
You did do before the COVID lockdown, I'm presuming, is what you're saying. Or have you?
Yes, just before COVID broke, we were in India, and we just managed to get out before they locked the country down. And when we got here, we had to practice self-quarantine for 2 weeks. And then after that, we're allowed to move around. And then after that, again, we had quarantine probably 2 or 3 times a week for a few days where you couldn't leave your house. So it's been a little bit difficult, but understandably so.
And is there a big Black community in Turkey?
Not at all, especially here in Antalya, and particularly so for pilots. There are not very many. I know of one other, a Black Britisher. He's in Turkish Airlines. And there's another guy from Barbados. But there's not a lot of minorities here at all in Turkey.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to find out who else is on the panel, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion that I hope you'll join in. So Yibu.
Yeah, hi, good evening.
Am I saying your name right, Yibu?
Yeah, Yibo, yes, Yibo, yes.
Yibo, how are you doing? Where are you, Yibo?
I'm in Nigeria.
Uh-huh.
Because I'm in Lagos right now.
All right, oh, okay, can I come?
Not now, after COVID-19 and the coronavirus that you can fly in.
Okay, when I was, Dr. Rolson and I were talking at the beginning, and one of the things I said was when we started to realize that COVID-19 was impacting so heavily on the Black and ethnic minority communities, our immediate assumption was that that might mean something in Africa, it might mean something in the Caribbean, that we might be seeing great numbers of African people dying from it. But it seems that you've managed to arrest the COVID-19 virus and have managed it really well. Tell us about what's been going on in Nigeria.
I don't know if we've been managed to arrest it or it's just by nature that if you have to sound spiritual, that it's God. Because I mean, if you check and have followed how many have died in America, in Spain, and in France, they would assume that from what conspiracy theories have been speaking about, what's his name again? The Microsoft guy, Bill Gates. Yeah, you know, on all of those stories, then you assume that it has a knowledge with the malaria assist to Africa, and he knows that Africans live communally. And he believes that our communal lifestyle will lead to the pandemic being extraordinarily tragic for us. Unfortunately, people are dying, well, tragically in trickles, you know, so we're not having to see all that we all assumed will happen in Africa. So the question is, what is really going on? Is it that they're not testing a lot of people, or people are just walking around the street, they don't even care, or their immune system is so solid that the virus is not, you know, things to get people scared, or just that the media, again, there's a fight with 5G, coronavirus, you know, and then no 5G, no coronavirus, you know, it's basic standard catarrh, cough, and then we're used to malaria anyway. And so when chloroquine is what the Europeans and Americans are looking for, we have it in our system. So there's something that is keeping us alive that we're not sure, and that we're hoping that WHO should come in and do a research properly to see how Africans are coping with this as opposed to what is happening in Europe and America.
And so is there much testing going on in Nigeria?
Yeah, there is, not like we want to. I mean, we are over 206 million. And then I mean, that's all over the country. We're having just trickles. The NCDC, they're doing the beat. But again, you notice that there's a high rate in malaria symptoms. And people would not want to claim that they have coronavirus because then it's stigmatized. So there's a stigma like AIDS or having Ebola. So once you have something that is similar to the coronavirus, you don't want the coronavirus as your first impression of what is your problem. You now claim you have malaria or you have typhoid.
And so we might be underestimating the numbers. Is that your suggestion?
Yeah, in between, yes. Yeah, underestimating, but particularly it's not as every other person or the world expected it to be in Africa. So while Africans are all muzzled up, right? We're saying there's something, if it is Madagascar, or there's something happening here with the herbal medicine. So why don't they come and check through what we do with the local medicines that we take from trees, we boil them. They're more like medicines for malaria. People just, in advance, people just begin to grow their immunity. I mean, we listen to what's happening in America, take your zinc, you know, take all of the vitamins. So people are doing that. I mean, they're like overdosing it, but be that as it may, people are looking stronger every day. So, but when you come and sit at home and watch CNN, watch BBC, watch Sky News, go to Yahoo, you get scared because the multiple deaths across the world, It's not happening in your neighborhood. So you're wondering if it's a fluke, you know. So if you are aware, you begin to get all dressed, all the social distancing, you get your mask on, you get your shield on, you know, you do all that you need to do, but you still come back and wash up and still try as much as you can to social distance. That becomes an individual effort because almost 70 to 90% of the persons on the street, they have to survive anyway. So survival becomes more than COVID-19 in the air, actually.
Thank you. Thanks very much for introducing yourself. Thanks very much for introducing the issue as it is in Nigeria. Hello, Dr. Bonhomme.
Hi, thank you for organizing this panel. Yeah.
Thanks very much for being here. Tell us about you, tell us about where you are, tell us about what you do.
So I should probably give a little prehistory, which is to say that my parents were born in Haiti and I was born in the United States, and I currently live in Berlin, Germany. So I'm a writer, researcher, and historian, and I'm also an activist who's part of Black Lives Matter here in Berlin. So I've been very involved as someone who has training in biology and public health, as well as someone who is currently based at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. So I've been following a lot of the things that have been happening in the United States as someone who's born there, raised there, as well as the dynamics of health disparities here in continental Europe and in Germany more broadly, what COVID looks like. So here, actually, there's been about 186,000 cases out of a country of 80 million, of which 169,000 people have recovered. So about 8,000 deaths, so at a death rate of 4.7%. And in Berlin, the capital where I live, there have been about 7,000 cases, of which 200 deaths. So the outbreak for COVID looks significantly different in terms of confirmed cases than it does in the UK or the United States, for that matter. And a lot of that has to do with testing, tracking, and containment, and having a stringent lockdown for a good 2 months, which is a bit different than what the dynamics we've seen in some other places.
And so has the virus been targeting the Black community in Germany in the same way that it has done here?
So that's a bit complicated. So unlike the United Kingdom and the US, there isn't official statistics on the Black community. There is an effort at this moment to create an Afro-census that is being led by Black Germans because they want to be documented. And there's a long-term history of Black people living in Germany, in German-speaking lands. If you want to know more about that, I would highly recommend following the website Black Central Europeans, as well as reading Tina Kamp's book, Black Germans. But there's not official documentation to show what the data is because the state doesn't document racial statistics. At the same time, at least within the Berlin context, there are Black people here. It's not clear that they're the ones who are getting it. Rather, what is the people who are disproportionately impacted are those who work in the healthcare industry, those who are working in nursing homes, those who are migrants from Eastern Europe who often are working as essential workers, whether it's picking Spargel, which is the asparagus, or in some cases working in grocery stores. So it's a bit more complex here because of the dynamics of labor, migration, and one of the groups that have been particularly vulnerable are those who are refugees coming from the Middle East as well as from the African continent. So if there's those who are living in tight quarters in lagers or camps where social distancing is not actually possible. So Black migrants who are part of those camps have actually stood up and said, we demand the housing facilities that allow us to have some form of dignity, social distancing, permanent placement, as opposed to being in this liminal state. So it's opening up a lot of questions about migration policies here in Germany and the extent to which, and this disproportionately impacts Black people from the African continent, as well as those who are coming from the Middle East and North Africa who have been for years waiting for permanent housing. So this is an important and valuable question about not just Black lives, but of course Arab lives and refugees more broadly.
Mm-hmm. And so it seems in Germany, it's kind of, if we stay with the analogy of the virus piggybacking on another virus, that the virus in Germany is poverty, and that the COVID-19 virus is piggybacking on poverty.
Well, I would say that it's linked to poverty and class, as well as migration status and citizenship. Mm-hmm. So if a person who is German born, who has access to heaps of resources, or someone coming from the global north who has a contracted job and isn't involved in precarious labor, is going to have a different relationship if they can work from home and have guaranteed pay versus those who may not have those resources. So the messiness of what's happening in Germany is one that is also tied to precarity, migration, and issues that had already pre-existed before COVID happened to begin with. And it is to the benefit of the state currently that they have a lot of resources and capital. Within the context of the EU, Germany is quite well off, and we're able to provide emergency funds immediately to freelancers, so people who were not necessarily in contracted positions, and even if they were foreign, they were able to get 5,000 euros within 48 hours of signing up for the emergency funds. And this was back in March when the lockdown began.
Okay, thank you very much. Adrian, hello. You need to unmute. If you click the little microphone thing next to on the left-hand side, you should be able to unmute yourself. I tell you what, I'll ask you to unmute and see if that works. Oh, hello. Oh, sorry, it's not Adrian, it's Gregory. Hello, Gregory. How are you doing?
Oh, I heard you call Adrian, so I'm like...
No, Gregory, that's because your name didn't come up and I thought you were Adrian, who was also supposed to be on this panel.
My name is there.
Yes, well, I'm glad you're here, Gregory. Where are you? Which country are you in? Where are you joining us from?
Trinidad.
You're joining us from Trinidad. And what do you do in Trinidad?
Well, I'm a good old economist. I run a consulting practice now. Yeah, that's about it. Do consulting work.
Okay, Gregory, I'm going to ask you to talk about your links with COVID, but before you do that, I'm going to ask you either to drop your camera a bit or to lift your head a bit, because, there you are. Look, I didn't even know you had the beard.
There you go.
Okay, tell me about your connection with COVID.
All right, so I guess that's two levels. I mean, one is I'm citizen, I mean, and we all connected in some way, but more importantly, I am also on the government's Road to Recovery team, which is a team of citizens that the government put together to really develop the roadmap for recovery of the economy and society from this COVID experience.
And so the roadmap to recovery, what that's in terms of business, that's in terms of education, that's in terms of what?
Well, I'm on the economic side. I'm on the side of the economy, but yes, it involves a whole host of things. It involves all the societal pieces, you know, the education, the health side, the industry side, and so on. It's interesting that Trinidad has been just following along some of the conversation that we've had before, that I think we've been pretty successful in curbing and in arresting this virus. We've had only one case in the last month, and that was an imported case when we started bringing people back home. And we're at stage 4 of reopening up now. So most of the country is reopened now, except public places like bars and cinemas and casinos and places of worship. Places of worship are going to open on Thursday. And so that would just leave the bars, the casinos, the cinemas, and of course, spectator sports. Those are not yet opened up. The beaches are going to open up next Monday. Beaches, waters, and recreation spots are going to open up next Monday. So that's the situation, and I think that a lot of our success has to do with the early lockdown of the economy, of the country, in terms of shutting the borders out and issuing public health instructions for people to stay at home. I think that worked well. I think we demonstrated as a people a level of discipline that I thought was impressive. I mean, I think we've done very well, certainly in the early days. There's some relaxation of it now because I think people are growing more confident that there is no COVID around us, and therefore we could be a little bit more relaxed. But yeah, I think we've done very well to have come out of it now, when we kind of like look forward to the opening up and restarted the economy.
What was the impact on the economy in Trinidad?
Very, very difficult. I mean, I think the entire Caribbean has had, in a sense, a double blow, because quite apart from COVID, which has caused shutdown of the production systems and disruption of supply chains and so on. In addition to that, because we're an oil and gas-led economy, you had oil prices crashing, gas prices crashing. So our main export earners are at some of the lowest prices for decades. But we're not alone in that regard, because the rest of the islands in the Caribbean as well depend on tourism, which, as you know, has been completely shut down and will be like that for quite a while. And that in itself has impacted on Trinidad in a different kind of way, because most of our non-energy exports actually go to the Caribbean as a primary market. So what you have is a situation in which all our export earnings are going to take a serious hit. And with that, you find a situation in which the government is going to be in a bind with respect to its own revenue base, and the fiscal deficit is becoming huge, and the foreign exchange earnings are really beginning to rapidly deplete, because we're not earning anything, and we're not going to be earning anything for quite a little bit yet. So the picture ahead is not a rosy one at all. Although the government has been doing what they can in terms of providing social support and support for businesses, and a whole fiscal package that is going to cost of the order of $10 billion Trinidad Tobago dollars. That's $1.5 US billion. That's the size of the fiscal package. Money is being paid out to various sectors for social support, rent support, mortgage support, small and micro businesses support, and so on. So there's a wide program that is in place that is going to cost a huge amount of money.
The most important single thing that we can do in recovery is what?
Go back to work. And work hard. No, I also heard, comments earlier on about how this thing has impacted those who are less fortunate, and including that is a number of people from Afro-Trinidadian communities. And I guess, I want to join the chorus that would say that in terms of the education system and the work from home and home schooling via the internet and so on. The government and the Ministry of Education has tried that, and a number of schools have kept classes online, but I'm afraid those that are least likely to perform in such situations are the same ones, and from the same schools and from the same areas that were least likely to perform in any event. So you have a worsening of that divide. And I'm afraid, as someone said earlier on, that will have an impact down the road, because you have children who simply have not been in school since March and would not be back in school until September, and teachers don't even know where they are.
Dr. Bonhomme, one thing we should be doing as we recover?
One thing we should be doing?
No. I'm asking Dr. Bonhomme now the same question.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Right.
One thing we should be doing as we recover.
As we recover from the current pandemic, the COVID pandemic? Well, I think that this moment is teaching us a lot about the inequalities that exist on a global scale with respect to the redistribution of public health funds, etc. Right now in the United States, there is a movement for Medicare for all, and it's looking at it from a nationalist perspective, but we should be thinking about that at an international level. There's no reason that in, for example, Mozambique, there's not a universal healthcare system that has the same kinds of services as in Germany, one that is not based off of charity, but that or an international kind of NGO model, but is provided by the state. So I think as we recover from this moment, it's about reimagining a world in which we redistribute wealth from the global north to the global south, places that actually have and produce and accumulate so much of the resources we have. And it also means a kind of re-envisioning of the types of resources we have been using. So in the global north, there's been so much consumption of petrol and your flights, etc. Now that people can't fly as much, it means that the earth is able to breathe a bit. And we have to, I think that means reevaluating why we travel, how much we consume overall, and how do we ensure that everyone's health is taken seriously. And then beyond that, and I have to mention this because I was born in the States, there's a growing social movement now to call for an end to policing. So defunding the police, demilitarizing the police, so that the money and for that goes towards stuff like education, housing for all, and getting rid of student loan debt. So I would say that the healing process or recovery process is one in which we reimagine and reconfigure the way that we organize society on a political level as well as a social level.
Thanks very much. I'm glad you came up with something that was nice and easy to do tomorrow. Evan Wilson, one thing we should be doing as we move into recovery. You need to turn your microphone on, Evan. You need to
I'm sorry, as we move into recovery,
yeah,
I think we should try and take away the lessons that we learned during the period that we were in lockdown. For example, the hygienic practices, the social distancing, things like that. Let's keep it going as we practice the new normal, and let's try and eat healthy and adopt a healthy lifestyle so that we can be protected from other illnesses as we move forward.
Okay.
That's
you,
what I would do.
Ibo?
Sorry?
I didn't ask you what you did. I saw that you said he didn't ask me what I did. So first of all, what do you do? And then what one thing we should be doing as we move into recovery? Microphone.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so I have a dance group. We're about 120. It's community-based. Mm-hmm. So the dance, our dances traces the American tap dance to the indigenous people of my community. Mm-hmm. And as of 3 months ago, I was made Director General, CEO of the River State Tourism Development Agency. So what I do right now is community-based tourism, trying to teach our people what tourism is all about beyond the infrastructural tourism of Oxford Street or Dubai or New York, because we are community-based. We have our dances, our masquerades, our fashion. So architecturally, we're not as refined as you might want to be in the new world, but to experience our cultural value, just like in Trinidad, like the carnival. So the whole idea is coming to our communities and experience us. So, but going forward, we're working on our physical efficiency programs to create wealth through what we do in the community. So going forward, yeah, like Doc says, let's keep what we have already. Be aware that if you have to take care of yourself, not just because it's the COVID-19 era, people have become very conscious of their health. People have become conscious of how they live. So let's keep that consciousness going further. But beyond that, we need to work for money. We need to have more proactive ways, but not by endangering ourselves in that process. So if we have a bright future, exactly what we want to look forward to, then I think we can do great. Africa is a bit different from the climate, like what's happening in Germany. There's a normal here that is alien to those living in Europe, you know, so that normalcy for us is, so when we have our diasporans, you know, say certain things and they were like, you guys are just about to learn things that are normal for us here. So we aim to, as much as we can, get better health-wise, because the health is wealth. And in Africa, health is, like she says, in Germany, is an area, sorry, you can imagine now, they've taken the light in my country, so.
Thank you very much. We'll leave you without your lights, and we'll just, because I can see Gregory has got his hand up.
Yeah.
So we'll go to one very quick comment from Gregory before we close the panel.
Yes, I want to reinforce what some of the things I heard. In particular, I think as a people coming out of this, we need to learn to save. We need to learn to save, and having saved, we need to learn to invest. Because I tell you, some of the people who cried earliest in this are those of African descent. We African people who cried very early poverty and brokenness and strictness, and simply because we had nothing to fall back on. And so the savings culture, I think, is one that we need to emphasize going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for being part of the second panel tonight. And thank you very much for all you've brought to it. We're going to go to our final 5-minute break, where our attendees can kind of run off, make themselves a cup of tea, go to the loo and put children to bed. And we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome back to the Ubele Initiative's final panel for tonight. And in tonight's panel, we're going to be looking particularly at public health and how public health has impacted on the ability of countries to arrest, to keep in place the COVID-19 virus. We're going to have Faith and Ayanna. Faith is in Tobago, Ayanna's in Jamaica. I wonder if you could both switch your cameras on. Hey, hello. And I'm waiting for a second camera to come on, or should I not wait? Whose camera's just come on?
This is Faith.
Oh, hello, Faith. How are you doing?
I am great.
And Faith, you're all the way out there in Tobago.
Yes, I am in Trinidad and Tobago, but I reside specifically in Tobago.
Okay, and you've been working with public health?
Yes, I'm actually, I carry many hats. I'm a politician, probably most known for being a politician, but I'm a social scientist with a specialty in public health. And I currently teach epidemiology at one of the universities here. So this is a fantastic time where everything we speak about in the class is suddenly happening in the real world. And that's exciting to see from the student-teacher perspective of epidemiology.
And you've been able in Tobago to make all of that learning work, and to, in all intents and purposes, you've managed to hold back. You've had no deaths, have you, in Tobago?
Actually, in Tobago, we've had one death. Trinidad and Tobago specifically has done a pretty decent job as it relates to responding to COVID-19 and using the public health structure to respond. And I think I wanted to start with identifying, when I say public health, what does that mean as opposed to medicine?
Tell me what it means, yeah.
Right, because when we think of medicine, we think of the individual patient being dealt with by the doctor, the nurse, and so forth. So there's almost that one-on-one relationship between the patient and the physician or the health professional. When we're talking about public health, though, what we're talking about is collectively looking at the health of the community. And Trinidad and Tobago, I think because we've been forced to, has actually had a pretty decent public health structure that gave us the ability to do the medical part of it, but also to do the public health part, which included, identifying the cases pretty quickly, doing the contact tracing, quarantining individuals when we've thought that they were at risk or they've been exposed. Of course, we've had the benefit of having oil and gas money to help us pay for some of that. So it's one of the few countries, for example, where we have state-sponsored quarantine. So if we think, if you get off of a flight and you land, a lot of those people go directly into a state-sponsored quarantine facility, and you did not have an opportunity to then mingle with the community and then have the community spread that we are seeing all over the world. So I think we've done a pretty decent job in that respect, and we need to be commended. But I also think that that this also highlights the fact that many countries, many quote-unquote first world countries, actually spent a lot of time developing their medical system and did not develop that public health aspect of their system. So you have the United States, for example, that is now trying to figure out what contact tracing is. And it is, you think to yourself, wow, this is one of the few times, being a smaller community, being a community without all of the resources that we think the first world communities have, we've been able to do things that those larger countries, those bigger economies, those countries with very good medical systems have not been able to do because of our public health response.
And but Tobago must have taken a real bashing, because Tobago, you're almost totally dependent on tourism, aren't you? And you've had to close all of your tourism down.
Exactly. Well, our economy is based a lot on transfers from the government of Trinidad and Tobago and tourism. So yes, the fact that we have closed our borders, we've closed our borders for several months now. We are finally allowing people to leave, and we are finally doing it, allowing citizens to return, but it's very slow and it's very measured and it's very calculated. So yeah, our tourism has practically ground to a halt, but we've again had the benefit of being an oil and gas country for all of those years, and could use those reserves, how little they may have been, to help sustain our community currently.
Because your bars are closed, your hotels are closed, your beaches are closed.
Everything.
Every reason that people should want to come to Tobago is closed.
Well, we are now, I think this week we've begun lifting some of those restrictions. We've begun opening back up. A lot of the public servants, for example, who were not in those who were frontline workers, a lot of the other public servants are now back out, although even though that is happening, it's still on a rotational basis, so you don't necessarily have to go every single day and be clustered and so forth. But yeah, the bars, everything that made Tobago the best place to be kind of shut down, and we haven't even opened up the beaches yet. And that is actually a message I get all the time from citizens who are saying, hey, this is ridiculous, let's open back the beaches. We are not crowding the beaches. There aren't that many of us to crowd the beaches in the first place. So we can socially distance ourselves at the beaches. So let's do that, please. But that's happening within the next week or so. I think our biggest issue, though, would be how we deal when we open back the borders, because then the floodgates come in, and such a large proportion of our population have ties in the United States and have ties in Europe and so forth, where those are the epicenters of the infection right now. So we are going to have to figure out how we do that. When we do that, I am a little nervous about those prospects. But you know, it is what it is. I think we've done a decent job thus far.
And so without the receipts from oil and the grant Tobago gets from Trinidad, your mother island.
Well, you've actually touched on a very stickler situation, because we are now trying to almost renegotiate the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and to have it more equal, being brother and sister versus mother and child, that kind of thing. So I will not turn this show into that kind of political discussion. But
you do have an election in Tobago, don't you, this year?
We have elections both. We have 2 elections this year. We actually have the national elections for Trinidad and Tobago. And in January 2021, we should have the local elections for the Tobago House of Assembly. And I'm actually a member of the Tobago House of Assembly currently.
Right, okay. And are they likely to go ahead? Well, of course they are. You don't have the problems that we have.
I think they will go ahead. As a matter of fact, you see many of the political parties already, you know, those in charge are telling us, don't gather, don't do all of that. And then you see pictures of the political parties doing exactly what they told us not to do, because campaigning has actually started. So yeah, elections are going to go ahead for general. And of course, the Tobago House of Assembly elections are due in January. So we still have a little bit of time to get to those by that point.
And so, as a small country, what advice would you give to Boris in London about what his next move should be? Because it seems that the countries of the diaspora have managed to actually manage this really very well, and have protected their populations from the worst impact of COVID-19. And so what would you say to Boris if you met him and he said, what should I do? What would be the next thing that you would be telling Boris to do?
I would replicate the what the WHO has been telling, which really has been to test as many people as you can, because there's really only one way to know if you have the infection or not. You have to be tested. Those who are tested then need to be isolated and need to be treated if you are sick enough to need treatment per se. And you need to be able to find those who are close contacts. I mean, those are the 1, 2, 3 steps of halting the spread, because what you don't want are individuals who have the infection to go out and spread it continually. What I would actually have preferred, as well as Trinidad and Tobago has done, I think we still could have actually done some more as it relates to enhanced testing. And we could have followed countries like Iceland and so forth, where the testing is done with not just individuals who are symptomatic or individuals who are at high risk, but we should have also gone out and tested other people who are not necessarily showing symptoms, do more of a community sampling to ensure that just in case, before we closed our borders and before we shut down the way we did, just in case there were people who kind of leaked into the system, we want to ensure that we caught that. The whole concept of using herd immunity as a response to COVID-19 completely blew my mind. And to think that larger countries would think that this would be a good idea in an infection where we don't know so much about the infection. I mean, everything we know now, a month from now, 2 months, a year from now, we'll be looking back and thinking, why were we so stupid? Why did we think we should only look for flu-like symptoms when we're now seeing people with heart disease? We're now seeing children coming up with Kawasaki-like syndromes and those types of things. So to think that herd immunity, for example, would have been a good idea shows that there was a perception about what the infection was, that we now know that is not the case. And we needed to go into this a little bit more cautiously. And those larger countries really needed to go into this way more cautiously than they did.
Thank you very much. Listen, what we're going to do now is that we're going to hear from Kelsey and from Eva to see what's been going on in the chat. And when we come out of that in about 3 or 4 minutes time, we're not going to have very long to go. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to give an opportunity for anybody from the panel. So all of the panel members, you can switch your microphones on when we come back and switch your cameras on. And if you wanted to say one final thing to kind of round up, or if you wanted to suggest a question for another panel member. And so thank you very, very much, Faith, for joining us. And thanks very much for telling us about the success of Tobago. Please open up quickly. I've not been to Tobago for a while. I need to get back there. I need your sun and your sand. And Kelsey, you're here. Tell us, what have you been seeing in the chat?
So kind of, there's a cool question from Twitter, so I might just ask that one. That's okay. Someone, D Woods has messaged asking everyone kind of, is it about recovery at this time or a reimagination of systems? And she said that these systems that are not built and rely on our oppression.
And so she's suggesting that there might be a bigger change necessary than just kind of recovering from where we are. We'll ask, I mean, I think that one of the panelists at least was kind of suggesting that earlier on. Eva, what are you seeing in the chat?
In the chat, there was a question on addressing disproportionality and maybe the suggestions for long-term, medium-term actions that we should be focusing on.
Right, and so what we should split our actions now into kind of short-term actions to get us out of the kind of madness that we're in, but we should keep our eye on the long term.
Yeah.
Were there any clues in the question as to how they might answer the question, or what they could for the long term to be?
No, there weren't any clues. It was just a question particularly relating to the UK and just being interested in different perspectives.
Okay. Thanks very much, the two of you. So if all of the panelists can switch your cameras on and can switch your microphones on. And I don't mind what order we go in, but I think we should start with, oh look, I've got two Dr. Yancey Rolsons on my nameplates. One of them's a new person. I know it's not Dr. Yancey Rolson because it's a male person. Who are you, the second Dr. Rolson?
Well, I assume it's me, Adrian Auger.
Oh, hello, Adrian. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. So you had some problems joining us, did you?
I did, but I think they're mine and not yours, so don't feel bad.
No, I'm not feeling bad. You're in St. Lucia, so why should I feel bad about somebody that's got a son and sent in St. Lucia
Yes.
when I'm stuck here in London?
Yes, I'm very much in St. Lucia.
Okay,
until further notice, it would appear.
Okay, Adrian, I'm sorry it's taken you so long to come on, but we've only got 3 minutes before we finish. And so I wondered if there was any kind of one or two things that you wanted to say before I just kind of moved around the panel.
Yeah, fair enough. Very quickly, I think that this pandemic and the economic ramifications of it have very clearly demonstrated for us in the Caribbean and certainly for St. Lucia how fragile our economic systems are. And if we do nothing else, I think it should be to look at our economic development models and see how we can focus more systematically on building our social infrastructure and maybe downplaying a little bit at this tremendous emphasis we've had on bricks and mortar and steel and glass and not on what I call brains and bellies. We're not in a conscious development model as we speak. We are in a sort of inevitability model. We have become highly dependent on foreign capital, and with that comes a foreign agenda with regard to the shape of our economies. And we really, I think, need to return to a conscious vision of what Caribbean civilization is supposed to be, so that we can refocus on participation, on equity, on proper income distribution, on ownership, and on self-determination. And I would like to know that at least coming out of this, there is some sort of Caribbean forum, some sort of Caribbean-wide conference, agenda, meeting of minds, which has to do with a reevaluation of some of our most important institutions, University of the West Indies included, Caribbean Development Bank, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, Caribbean Association of Industry and Commerce, Caribbean Association of Banks, teachers, associations of teachers, and other institutions like that, CARICOM and the rest. There has to be a return to a regional agenda about the development model for these islands, because right now we're just drifting along.
Something I learned.
Crisis after crisis.
Something I learned very recently, Adrian, when I was doing another piece of work, when one of the things we were looking at was food security in the Caribbean.
Food security, energy security, yes.
It amazed me that Tobago was importing more than 80% of their food. How can somebody with such good soil, rain and sun be importing 80% of their food? It just didn't make sense.
Well, it's not much different in any of the Caribbean islands who have embraced tourism as their lead sectors. Tourism has created a high level of dependency across all of these islands. And the World Bank not so long ago pointed out that the rates of growth that are supposed to be generated by in those islands which have tourism as their lead sectors is in fact quite inadequate. We've not taken that to heart, and we continue to pretend that that's going to be sort of the savior lead sector, and it's not. It's a highly corrosive kind of industry, and we're not at all trying to remodel it in a manner that would make it more beneficial for our islands. So Caribbean tourism, as a matter of fact.
I'm sorry, but we really are about to run out of time.
Yes.
And what I would like to do is I'd like to hear from each of the panelists, but I do have a specific question that I'd like you to address in 15 seconds each, if you can. But what should the diaspora do to keep connected and to help us as a unit to be developing wherever we are in the world. Just one thing each.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that we need to learn from each other and learn from the successes of each other and not try to replicate the wheel, not try to rebuild the wheel, because within some of these small communities, we have had such great successes that we can learn from each other and not necessarily look to those first world countries to learn from, because we have actually been doing it here.
Thank you very much. And
Do you want me to jump in?
Who's that? Sorry.
Renee.
Hello, Renee, go for it.
I think we've got to really reimagine what we want to be, because the world is changing right now. Everything is not going to be the same. We know it's the new normal. It's the new reality. The world is now trading data. If we do our research, we will see that every system that's being designed to treat with this pandemic and pandemics moving forward are going to be generated by artificial intelligence. It's just the reality in which we live. Is the reality in which we're going to exist. I think Caribbean countries have got to understand what's happening. We're usually 10 years when it comes behind, when it comes to really looking at things like technology, but technology is going to generate and move us forward. And I think if anything, we've got to pay attention, because we're already being left out when it comes to the design of artificial intelligence systems and anything that deals with emerging technology. So we've really got to step it up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to add to what Renee has said. We just all need to have our cultural exchange, leveled up, more of an industrial development, because we need to be independent. Like you said, most of what we do here in Africa, 80 to 90% of what we do we still import, even when we are through the natural resources here. So I think we should rejig the need for the diaspora and the home base to come back together and unite to doing things moving forward.
Thank you very much. Would any
I'd just like to say
advantage of this opportunity, or
I'd like to say.
I can't hear you, Anne. You need to speak up.
I'd like to. Can you hear me now?
Just yes.
Yes. I'd like to say that I think we need to really think about how we are going to support our young people to overcome some of the challenges that they have faced through this pandemic, and the consequences, the ramifications going forward, that they are protected from that we find solutions to this that are going to protect them from the disadvantages that can follow them for generations, actually, if we're not careful.
I'd like to thank all of my panelists for being here today. I'd like to thank you for being responsible for such a stimulating conversation with so many different prongs and so many different actions that need to take place. I'd like to put Dr. Ralston on the spot and to invite her to bring this group of people together again to continue some of that discussion about how the diaspora remains connected, and how we can begin to kind of feed each other, learn from each other, and to develop each other as we move forward. I'd like to thank you all very, very much for being here. Would you like the final word, Dr. Ralston, before we close?
Yeah, just to say thank you for being here. And my response to your question is, I think we need to start decolonizing our systems and structures and have self-belief that we can do it as a diaspora. That's my final word. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Contact details. Stay connected.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.